This is Dolynny TV, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of Edmonton Oilers discussion here on the channel this afternoon. Ooh, my goodness, was a bomb ever dropped in Oilers land this afternoon on Oilers Now by Scott Howson. Wow, alright, I'm sorry. We have not had anything to this degree of Oilers news in terms of prospects, anything. I mean, the Lavoie signing was big and all is dandy, but that was just to be expected. However, today, the news coming out of Scott Howson, absolutely incredible, because this sets up a lot of the questions our good friends down there in Bakersfield may have. Now, yes, okay, all of a sudden I mentioned the word that probably makes a quarter of you that tuned into today's video jump off and leave. Please don't. Please don't, because I need you to stick around, because this has big implications. Obviously, like I keep saying, I keep loosely talking about the expansion draft for 2021, and this does have implications for the expansion draft to a degree. So, what I need you to understand first is a look at the Oilers roster on the blue line at the NHL level. Clefbaum, Larson, Russell, Nurse, all signed through next year. Green, AUFA. Benning, RFA. Problem is, I know my buddy X and I've already discussed this a little bit. What do you do with Matt Benning, right? Is you kind of see the challenge he's having finding even a spot in the lineup some nights all of a sudden after these 2 concussions, and it's just there is no clear direction. All right, that's just how I'm going to put it. Hopefully Matt Benning's back, because as I finally turned the page on him midway through this year, I'd like to be able to continue turning the page and see this guy pay off down the line. However, if he doesn't, that's just Oilers hockey and we move on. Then you've also got Ethan Bear, who's an RFA. Caleb Jones signed to that $850,000 contract through next season. So you, technically speaking, guaranteed, right? Matt Benning being a question mark, you've guaranteed got six total defensemen signed for next season. So you need a 7th defenseman. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that means William Lagesson more than likely to come up from the AHL. Now, obviously, if we get some compliance buyouts, all that kind of deal, guess what? That also means probably Evan Bouchard moves up to the NHL level. Now, in the minors, what I need you to understand here as we discuss Bakersfield, Brandon Manning has been playing down there for the most of the year. Well, $2.25 million cap hit, after all my aching and crying, is off the books at the end of this season whenever they officially call it done. Whether we play the playoffs or we don't, when they call it done, he's gone, we're good, we're gold. Now, Philip Broberg on loan in Skellefteå. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he is there with Philip Berglund. We'll talk about Berglund in a minute, but Broberg, one of the guys we will also talk about in a minute. Evan Bouchard, like I said, probably up to the NHL. Dmitry Samorukov, he's a mainstay. Logan Day, well, this is the question, right? Logan Day started the season off injured. What becomes of Logan Day? Probably another good answer to find out what happens here in Edmonton Oilers land. Because if you're looking at bringing in some young blood into Bakersfield, he's a guy that you take off of the 50 contract roster and remove from the situation. As much as I know a lot of guys down in Bakersfield last season in particular really loved what Logan Day brought. Lagesson up to the NHL. Keegan Lowe, the captain. What do you do with Keegan Lowe? I'm not sure. That's the thing, right? Is obviously you want to have a veteran defenseman. Keegan Lowe is your pro AHL player. He's your guy that most likely for the rest of his career, unless they find some sucker NHL team that really needs defensemen, will not see NHL time. That's just kind of the trajectory of the career he's on. That said, Keegan Lowe, very, very valuable at the AHL level. He fights, he hits, he does everything you need a defenseman to do in a shutdown role, especially at that level, a tougher role. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Keegan Lowe, kind of your wild card. So where does that leave us? That leaves us Samorukov, Lagesson, 99% will get signed. I don't know why he wouldn't. And of course, Philip Broberg, Bouchard, all in there. So you've got 4 guys maximum that are guaranteed locks to be signed by the Oilers going into next year on the minor league roster right now. Oh boy, because we're talking 2 of those guys more than likely to move up. So that leaves Broberg, who's playing in Sweden right now, to hopefully fill one of those holes. And Dmitry Samarukov as well. Probably toss in Keegan Lowe on there as well and see what happens. But you've got a maximum, even if you throw in Keegan Lowe and Logan Day, of 4 AHL defensemen. Well, where do you fill the other 2 holes? That's the question. Well, how about we move over to that news I was talking about, right? That atomic bomb that was dropped in terms of Oilers defensive prospects on the farm by Scott Howson. That being, simply put, that they're in contract talks with 2 guys. If you have ever played NHL franchise mode, like EA Sports NHL, you guys would know these guys. That's the one beauty of that game, is if you get the right rosters, they have the guys that we drafted, and you get to know these guys a little bit. Like I got to know Caleb Jones in NHL 17, which you can, by the way, watch a ton of videos on Caleb Jones in NHL 17 here on Dolynny TV, because I did not delete any of that, so that's for your viewing pleasure. A little bit of a shout out to myself, because man, these tough times out here. Support your local YouTuber. That's it. Right? Philip Berglund, Marcus Niemelainen. Those are 2 names that you need to know right now, as of now. Those are 2 names the Oilers confirmed by Scott Howson on Oilers Now today. Well, they're in contract talks with. And if you go to the cap-friendly page to the Oilers reserve list, at the top of the list you will see 22-year-old Philip Berglund, who is also playing for Skellefteå this season. Well, you know what? He is due up UFA end of May, beginning of June 1st, 2020, which is kind of scary, right? This is a guy from the 2016 draft. In fact, we took 2 guys in the 2016 third round, both of which we're talking about today, Philip Berglund and Marcus Niemelainen. June 1st, 2020 for Niemelainen as well due to that. So, where does that leave us? Niemelainen, a 21-year-old, he has been playing with, I'm not even going to attempt, because my finish is terrible, and every time I attempt it, I get corrected. So he's in the Liga right now. He's currently listed to be returning there. We're not too sure. But Niemelainen, 7 points in 54 games with Liga team this year. That's where I'm going to leave it. Now, Philip Berglund, what you need to know about him is in the Champions Hockey League this season, he had 2 points in 8 games, as well as 20 points in 51 games played. The Edmonton Journal article discussing this today has a note there that I think he was in the top 20 for defenseman scoring this season, was Philip Berglund, so that is an interesting note there. And Berglund is in fact the one drafted later. Niemelainen was drafted 63rd overall, 91st overall for Berglund. Now, alright, that leaves it here, which is we have to go back to that minors roster. We have to go back and discuss Philip Broberg, right? If we sign Niemelainen and Berglund, the plan would be, given what I've kind of broken down to the roster, I really don't see any other defensive studs within the Oilers system that we're going to go call up. Let's go double check that, right? Matthew Carnes, he's not due up. Graham McPhee's a winger, so nobody's due up for a contract. And on a team that's going to be strapped for contracts year after year for the next little while, with that number 50, well, you know what? We don't really have any. And guess what? We've got Michael Kesselring from the college ranks. You've got Philip Kemp of the college ranks, and you've got Matthew Carnes. Those guys are the other D prospects we have on the reserve list right now. So Niemelainen and Berglund make sense to add to the AHL roster if we get them signed. There's really no reason to loan them. Now, I know the Edmonton Journal article talks extensively. There is quite the possibility, according to Howson, that they will still be loaned. But you look at the math, right? You look at making up an AHL roster, and of course, if you need to go down to the what would you call it? You would call it the ECHL roster as well. There's kind of a question, right? Is the only guy that we really have in between the two this year that's Oilers property is Vinny Desharnais, right? Vinny Desharnais, who came to the Oilers camp, all that. He's a college product, big kid. We like that. Well, that's the only other real wild card. So there's a potential that you can add 7 defensemen in there if you're including Broberg into the mix. So that leaves the question, what happens with Philip Broberg? Well, I think definitely the plan, as best laid out last summer, Broberg plays one more year in Sweden, plays against pros at home. I was totally fine with that. When, you know what, you do the math, it makes sense. Sure, Then, you know what? Get him into the pro game in North America at the AHL level, because Broberg will then be 19, 20 years old, and he'll be ready to take on that course load, especially if you've got the right supporting defensive cast around him. And you think about a guy like Philip Berglund, who's been playing with his teammate Philip Broberg this year. Well, okay, that's a good support to have, right? Bring out your two kids to the AHL level at the same time from the same team in Europe. That's fantastic. You keep Keegan Lowe, right? And then you have Dmitry Samorukov, who knows what it's like to make the jump. You bring in a guy like Logan Day, who's been there before, right? Okay, all of a sudden you've got yourself a defense. Question is, right, does that all come together? I think that's, at the end of the day, does this all come together? But this is absolutely huge news, because our defense in the AHL next season could look like Peter Chiarelli's dream out there, other than Philip Broberg. Realistically, that's what it could look like for sure. And I know there's been a lot made of an interview that I still have not found time to find online, of Peter Chiarelli talking about being a victim of early Oilers success. I think that's a clickbait headline that I saw on Facebook, so I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. But you look at it that way, right? There is a lot to unpack here when you start talking about bringing these guys over. And my goodness, hey, you know what? At least some intrigue, right? I talked about an atomic bomb. Guys, this is an absolute roster-changing interview on Oilers Now for the Bakersfield Condors today, directed from the Director of Player Development here in the Oilers system before he departs to be the head of the AHL right away. So, interesting, right? And I mean, even if it is only discussion points, that's the thing, right? They're in contract talks. They're not signing deals. Otherwise, I'd be giving you all the stats. I'd be breaking it all down. We'd have an exclusive kind of deal for each player, and we'd get talking. No, right now, we're just talking simply about making an AHL defense, making sense of it, and kind of the implications of what was said today, because it leaves us something to talk about on a fine Tuesday. It's been snowing all day here in southern Alberta off and on. It's colder. The whole mess outside my door. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was some welcome, big news in Oilers land this afternoon. I'll let you chew on it in the comments section down below. I'm Tyson, this is Dolynny TV. You know I can't do this. She's Zap. I'm up on out of here.